Hi, my name is Kelly Tebow, and I'm with the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders. I am your organizer for this evening and would like to welcome you to our webinar on air therapy dogs, Paws for Minds. Thank you all for joining us. Before I have my colleague introduce the speaker for tonight, I'm going to cover some housekeeping items with you. All participants are muted. If you have a question, please type it in the bottom of your question box and click send. You may send questions during the webinar. However, we will have Ms. Baker answer the questions at the end of her presentation. We will get to as many queries as time allows. In addition, tonight's presenter is available to take your questions on the Wednesday webinar blog, which is accessed from our homepage under the heading Programs. This blog will be monitored for the next 7 days. Feel free to look and post questions as often as you like. Answers will be archived for future reference. If you missed part of the presentation or would just like to watch it again, an archived version will be posted to our website. We value your input. In order to expand the webinar experience in the future, we need everyone to fill out the survey when you exit the webinar. The New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, its directors and employees assume no responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, or usefulness of the information presented. We do not endorse any recommendation or opinion by any member or physician, nor do we advocate for any treatment. Now, I'm going to turn over the introductions of our speaker to Barbara Chabner, the Program Manager of NJCTS. Barbara?
Thanks, Kelly, and good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for Air Therapy Dogs, Paws for Minds by Tricia Baker. After a 20-year corporate career in marketing, following the tremendous loss of her son, Kenny, Tricia recognized the need for educating our nation's youth about good mental health, and with her family started Attitudes in Reverse, or AIR, which includes the Air Therapy Dogs, Paws for Minds program. Tricia believes that Attitudes in Reverse is Kenny's life purpose, and she is driven to educate as many students across the country as possible. She is also a certified youth mental health first aid instructor, educating adults who work with children about the first signs of mental health disorders in youth. Tricia runs the National Therapy Dog program Air Therapy Dogs, Paws for Minds, which is recognized by the American Kennel Club. She is also a certified professional dog trainer's knowledge assessed, an AKC Canine Good Citizen evaluator, and certified air therapy dog evaluator. Dogs are a very integral part of Tricia's work with AIR, included in educational programs at schools and presentations at conferences. The AIR dogs also provide crisis support in schools after the loss of a student. It is my great pleasure to turn the program over to Tricia Baker, who will speak on Air Therapy Dogs, Paws for Minds. Tricia?
Thank you so much, Barbara and Kelly. I just want to confirm everybody can hear me and see my screen and that I did everything I needed to do technically. All right. So thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's an honor for me to talk about our programs and also for us to share our dogs. So our journey started, always loved dogs, always had dogs, but the journey really started when my son Kenny was diagnosed at the age of 15 with a mental health disorder. And he struggled and he worked really hard to get well, but unfortunately we did lose him to mental health disorder and suicide. And after he died, his memory was met with a lot of discrimination. So we knew we needed to change things. And that was the start of Attitudes in Reverse, or AIR. Mental illnesses like AIR, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. We started out going to small little town events, or a school event here or there. And what we found, this is going back 11 years ago, people really didn't want to talk about mental health or suicide prevention. They'd walk up and they see what you're all about and they would make a face, and they would just almost like they would run away, like they were afraid of catching something. And then we started bringing Miki along with us. Miki is my service dog. He's also a certified therapy dog, but he started coming everywhere with us. And what we noticed was this amazing thing that people would come up to pet the dog. They'd talk to Miki, they'd share stories about their dog, and they'd ask us then, what's AIR all about? And then we would share. And 9 out of 10 people had their own story that they would share after the interaction with the dog. So we knew that it was important that we include dogs in everything that we do, and all of our programs just continue to grow and grow, and dogs are our partner in everything. So let's talk a little bit about how dogs are good for our mental wellness. You know, about 15 years ago, people really weren't studying the benefits of dogs because they lived with us, right? We didn't study them. Scientists didn't feel it was important to study. But then all of a sudden, people started to look at the dogs a little closer and start realizing, you know, maybe we need to study this relationship, this human-animal bond that we have. And what we've discovered is that when you interact with a dog, actually just looking at a dog releases oxytocin in your brain. That's the relationship hormone, the lactating hormone. When you interact with a dog, it releases serotonin, dopamine, and it lowers your cortisol level, which is your stress hormone. And what I think is really, really interesting is that when you interact with your personal dog, it also increases those same good de-stressing hormones and lowers your dog's cortisol level. So the dog's brain has the exact same response as the human brain when we interact with each other. And that's through this relationship that we've created through domestication. So I also want to talk a little bit about the 3 types of support animals. These get confused all the time. It's really important to understand what the titles are and what laws they fall under. All right, so let's first talk about an emotional support animal. They're referred to as ESAs. So what's an emotional support animal? An emotional support animal is any animal that the presence of the animal alone will help to mitigate a person's disability. Now, the emotional support animal does fall under 2 different laws. The first one is the Airline Carriers Access Act. And maybe you see more and more dogs or animals on airplanes. The airlines allow animals to fly in the cabin with the person. If you have a dog, the little dog can actually sit on your lap. Or if you have a bigger dog, usually they sit in the bulkhead. But they do fly. I know a lot of the airlines are starting to crack down on ESAs because more and more people were bringing all sorts of animals. So an emotional support animal does not necessarily have to be a dog. It can be any animal. It can be fish. It can be a bird. It can be a cat for those who have anxiety. Maybe they don't go out much, but it can be any animal. And then they're finding that people were bringing some of the exotic animals on airlines. So they're starting to limit them to well-trained dogs, and they're looking now for a certification that the animal has been trained. Then the other law that it falls under is the Fair Housing Act under the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, under HUD. And what that means is that the animal can live in no-pet housing with a person with a disability. And the person with the disability, all you need to do is have a note from your doctor stating how the animal helps you with the disability, helps to mitigate the disability. You do not have to disclose to the landlord if you're living in apartments. You do not have to disclose what your disability is, just how does the animal help. And then the animals can live in no-pet housing, can fly on airlines, and people cannot ask them to be removed unless they disturb the area. They make a disturbance on the airline, or if they're not well-behaved dogs, or if they show any sign of aggression while living in no-pet housing. All right, the next type of support animal is the service dog. So sometimes people get these confused, so I want to make sure I'm really clear in how we describe the difference. So again, the emotional support animal, it is an animal that is not task trained. It's just the presence of the animal alone will mitigate a disability. Whereas the service dog The service dog must be task trained to perform at least one task that's going to help to mitigate a person's disability. The service dog falls under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It is restricted to dogs or miniature horses. Those are the only two animals that can be a service animal. Up until 2010, it was any animal, just like the ESA, and they were finding that people were bringing their boa constrictors into the grocery store, and people knew that we needed to change things. So the other thing that's different about the service dog, or if it's a miniature horse, it's also allowed full public access. So anywhere a human is able to go, the working service dog is also able to go. Now, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the seeing eye dogs. They help people who are blind or have seeing issues. There are hearing dogs that help people with tasks to help them if they can't hear. A lot of dogs are trained to alert their owners, you know, when the phone rings or if the doorbell rings. So it helps them with their disability. But there are more dogs that are being trained now for invisible disabilities. The psychiatric service dog, and it can be a little challenge. We'll talk a little bit more about the psychiatric service dog, but first I want to talk a little bit about the public access test. So the ESA, as well as the service dog, neither one has any type of state or federal certification. A lot of it is done on the honor system, and that's why a lot of people can get in trouble with their dogs. They do not require, there's no organization or no overseeing body that requires a level of training for these animals. There is a public access test, but it's all voluntary. And things that are on that public access test for the service dog is, you know, you want to make sure your dog can go to different types of locations, through different types of doorways, right? You think you go to a store and you have the electric doors that open, or you know, you have all different types of situations. You want to make sure that the dog is able to travel on different types of public access. They need to be able to be on a bus, to be on a train. Service dogs can also fly on an airplane as well. And when we're training dogs, we always look at it 2 different levels of training. We want them to be able to work with, you know, public access transportation on the ground, and then once they achieve a certain level, if the handler, the person who needs the service dog, needs to have a higher level, be able to fly with the dog, that requires additional training, because you don't ever want to put a dog just on a plane and then travel to, say, California for 6 hours, because you have no idea how the dog's going to respond. It's important to understand that aggression, 95% of aggression is all fear-based. So if you put a dog on a plane and they're nervous or afraid, you might wind up with a dog that bites. And that has happened in the past, and that's why, again, airlines are cracking down on all types of dogs. So disqualifying behaviors, dogs who demonstrate boisterous behaviors or growling or showing teeth, biting, aggression, excessive fear, or inappropriate elimination. Those are dogs that will not pass, again, but this is a voluntary test. Now, this test it's interesting because, as I said, there is no governing body, federal or state, for service dogs to be trained. And more dogs are being trained for psychiatric service dogs. And under the ADA, they don't want to discriminate. So basically, it says that you can either train your own service dog, or you can hire a trainer to train your service dog. So what you have to do when we're training a psychiatric service dog, it's a little challenging, because all people who need a seeing eye dog have very similar needs, and the dog is trained in a very similar way. But when you have a psychiatric service dog, what you have to do is we do a lot of interviews. Now, we've placed a few psychiatric service dogs. We've done a little bit of training with psychiatric service dogs, but what we found is it's really challenging, and we want to make sure we promise a dog that we're able to promise at a certain level. But when we do work with the psychiatric service dog, you got to identify what is the need, you know, from the disability, and then what can the dog do to help that person with that need, and then we have to figure out how do we train the dog to help the person with that need. So it's a little tricky. We did work with one rescue, and we placed the dog with a young lady who needed mobility support as well as a psychiatric service dog. So we did find a black lab who one of our volunteers trained for over a year. And when we placed this dog, the dog was amazing. The dog could decorate a Christmas tree. The dog could pick a coin up off the floor. The dog would help her retrieve her medication when she was having a difficult time getting up, getting out of bed. The dog would help what's called grounding. So if someone's having a panic attack or an anxiety attack, what the dog will do is the dog will put their body and apply pressure on the human's body to help alleviate the anxiety. Yeah, the dog actually was trained as well to find her car in a crowded parking lot if she became disoriented. So it's actually really amazing what you can train dogs to do. So as I said, we had a couple other service dogs that we were working with, but we just found once we placed them in the family, they became pets. So we just recognized that training at a psychiatric service dog level is extremely high, and you have to have a true commitment from the family. You know, we always tell everybody that the psychiatric service dog is like somebody's wheelchair, right? You're not going to have people coming up and talking to their wheelchair, touching their wheelchair, using their wheelchair. It's like that person needs that wheelchair in order to function in life. And that's the same thing with the service dogs. And the psychiatric service, again, it's hard for them because of the invisible illness. A lot of times people will come up and they don't even accept the fact that you have a service dog. You know, as I said, Miki is my service dog. After I lost my son, I was having panic attacks, and so I brought him everywhere with me. I don't need him as much anymore, but I would go places and people would just automatically touch him, and it's like, I'm sorry, he's working, and then they get upset. So when you have a psychiatric service dog, you have to be ready for people to approach you, talk to you, try to touch your dog without permission. And you have to always be ready to be your dog's advocate as well. You know, no one should ever touch a dog without an owner's permission. And if it's a service dog, people should respect the right that when you say, no, my dog is working, please don't touch him right now. So those are the messages that we try to get out there so that, you know, people can benefit from having these service dogs in their life. So now let's talk about therapy dogs. So that's my little Miki. So what's a therapy dog? All right, so a therapy dog is a dog, doesn't fall under any national laws. There's different therapy dog organizations, and Air Dogs, Paws for Minds is one of those national organizations. We're recognized by the American Kennel Club. And therapy dogs go places and they make people smile. And that's all they do. And this is a picture of Miki on my mom's lap when my mom was in a nursing home. For 2 years, she didn't talk, but when Miki would go visit, she would say dog or doggy. So that's how we got her to at least talk. And we think too that she recognized us, but she loved Miki, and he always loved to go visit her. But dogs, therapy dogs, help people in hospitals, in nursing homes, in libraries. Research shows that children who grow up reading to dogs grow up to be more confident readers. Any facility where the presence of a dog will help somebody is where we like to bring therapy dogs. Our focus at Air Dogs is we're in schools, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the programs that we do. But it's amazing that, you know, dogs, how they just make people happy. So I just want to stress, not every dog can be a therapy dog. As a dog trainer, a lot of people will show up in class and they have a dog and they're like, I want my dog to be a therapy dog. And we look at the dog, and some dogs have mental health disorders, just like human beings do. Some dogs have anxiety disorders. Some dogs have OCD. You know, so we want to make sure that a therapy dog actually enjoys what they're doing. We never want to put a dog in a situation where they feel stressed or they feel uncomfortable. So we want to make sure people recognize the fact that not every dog can be a therapy dog. So, but what happens if you want your dog to be a therapy dog? All right, so these are the requirements. The dog must be at least 1 year of age. Dogs, believe it or not, puppies are puppies only until about 6 months of age. And then from 6 months to about 18 to 24 months, they're teenagers. And then after 24 months, then they're considered adults. So, you know, we want to make sure that the dog is mature enough. Some dogs at 1 year of age are mature enough. Our one little Pomeranian, Henry, he passed his test at 1 year of age. My other dogs were older. They were between 2 and 3 before they passed their test. So the dog must have lived with the handler for at least 6 months. And that's because if someone rescues a dog, you may not know the dog's true personality right away. So we want to make sure that the dog has lived with the owner for a while, and you know your dog, and you're going to understand whether or not this is something that they're actually going to enjoy. Any dog that has a bite history, that seems like common sense, right, is excluded. And then we want to make sure too that the dog is all up to date on their health, on their vaccines, and that they get an approval by their vet that they're healthy in order to go different places. So COVID has actually changed things a little bit for us, because a lot of the places where we would go typically with our therapy dogs have shut down. They're starting to open up now. And we've implemented some new rules for visiting with our therapy dog. Typically, we allow 2 people petting at a time, but now with COVID, it's 1 person petting at a time, and we're asking everybody either to use a wipe right before they touch or just use some hand sanitizer before they touch. And then when everybody's done petting, then we wipe the dog down with a grooming wipe. We just want to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe, including the dog. But some of the studies are showing that dogs are not, they don't carry and they don't transmit. There were a couple stories early on, but there really hasn't been any more stories like that. So some organizations like Air Dogs, we require that the dog also earns their AKC Canine Good Citizen certification. So that's just one more level of training. We want to make sure that when dogs go out, no matter where they're going, that the handler is feeling confident, and that the dog and the handler have this great relationship where they can go different places and they can make lots of people smile. So when we test with the Canine Good Citizen test, we're actually just testing the dog. But when we do our therapy dog test, we're actually testing the dog and the handler together as a team, because we want to make sure that they have this great relationship. When dogs go out on therapy visits, they shouldn't be concerned about their environment. Their focus should be on their handler. And it's this relationship that they develop through training that's going to allow them to do that. You know, we want them to be able to say hello to people, of course, but I always give my dogs permission to say hello. So they just don't go pulling on the leash and jumping up on people, because sometimes we might interact with people who are a little bit nervous around dogs. So we don't ever want anyone to be scared of our dogs. So I always teach them a go say hi cue, that they're able to then go say hi. All right, so you always want to make sure that, again, they're focused on the owner. The other thing too about it's this relationship of trust is that I remember I was down the shore at one event, and it was National Night Out, and the police were there, and they brought all their equipment. I didn't know they had a cannon, and they shot off their cannon. Well, they scared me and they scared my dog. But my dog looked at me, I looked at him, and we were both able to recover fairly quickly. And that's because of this relationship, this bond that we have. He knew I had his back. He knew I wasn't going to let anything harm him. And that's really what we want as dogs go places doing therapy work, because they're going to be in buildings they've never been in before. They're going to be walking on surfaces they've never walked on before. They're going to be smelling smells they've never smelled before. They're going to be hearing things, and just so your dogs don't generalize. So what that means is if you do all your training at home in your kitchen or in your family room, and you take your dog to a new environment, it doesn't translate. So a real quick, for instance, Miki, when we finally did take his test, I drove an hour and a half north in pouring rain to go take his test, and we were in a brand new school, and the surface of the floor was completely different than anything we've ever been on. And when I asked him to do a down, first thing that they asked us to do, he looked at me and he says, "I'm not going down on that. I don't know what that is." And they allowed us to go through the rest of the test. And by the end of the test, he felt comfortable enough with me asking him to go down. But just because the dog knows something at home doesn't mean they're going to know it in class. It happens to us all the time in our dog training classes. People look at me in class when their dogs are not listening to them, and they're like, "But he does it perfect at home." It's because dogs don't generalize the behaviors, not until we do them over and over and over again, and then we work on getting them to do them in different environments. All right, so now let's talk about what type of dog makes a good therapy dog or support dog. So that's a really broad question. It can be any breed of dog. It can be a rescue. It can be a dog purchased from a breeder. My dogs, I used to rescue all of my dogs, but now that all my dogs have a job and need to go places, I have gotten my last 4, I have 5 dogs now. My last 4 have come from breeders where I know the temperament of the parents, and in many cases, I know the temperament of the grandparents, so that I know when I bring the dog into my home that they'll be a good candidate for therapy work. But my dogs previously were rescues, and they were also good dogs to do therapy work. It's just you have to be a little more you have to be cautious, because when you rescue a dog, you just don't know what their story is, and they may be a super therapy dog, or they may be that shy dog, or that dog that has anxiety, or the dog maybe that was never socialized around men, so they're afraid of men. So you just don't know. But a dog from rescue or a dog from a breeder, any breed, as they say. I had a little pit bull when I first started doing dog training. She was not a therapy dog right away, but it was funny because she would watch me as I walked out every single day with my other dog who was a therapy dog, and she had the sad look on her face. So at the age of 13, I certified her, and we would go places, and people would say, "Well, what tricks does she know?" And I would say, "She's 13. She walks around, you pet her. That's what she does." And she enjoyed it, and she did it for about 2.5 years. And we did lose her around just shy of 17, but she really enjoyed it, and she was a little pit bull mix. Our dog makeup now, I have 3 little dogs. I have 3 Pomeranians. 2 of them were actually donated to us by a breeder in Texas who had 3 children with mental health issues, and she wanted to give back. So she donated dogs to us with the purpose of them being therapy dogs. And the little dogs can actually be really nice. We go into schools, as I said, we talk to kids, and what you can do is you get them to sit on the floor. You can put a little dog on their lap. I always keep one hand on my dog so that my dog knows I'm staying connected with them. But a lot of times kids like the dog on their lap. Usually when I'm going to visit with older students, high school students, that's why I bring the little dogs. When I go visit younger students, right, little dogs break easy, so I bring my 60-pound collie, and he lies on the floor, and kids can pet him, they can lay on him, you know, and they enjoy him, and I feel he's safe. So depending upon where I go is going to determine which size dog that I bring. So it's not really about what type of dog. You want to look at the individual dog and figure out, is this dog going to be happy doing this work? You know, a lot of times dogs are just happy being with you. And if I have to do therapy work just to be with my owner, well, I'm going to do it and I'm going to have fun. So there's two different types of therapy work that you can do with your dog. So the first one is referred to as AAA, or animal assisted activities. And that's the casual meet and greet where your pet, you just walk, say, into a hospital or a nursing home, and you go from patient to patient, and they pet and you visit. So there's no goal directive therapy in that. It's just saying hi to people and having people smile when they get to meet your dog. And then there's animal assisted therapy, which is becoming more and more popular. It's a goal directed intervention by a health professional. And the therapy dog is built into as part of the treatment plan. So here's my Miki. So Miki was he received our first national award. He received an award from the American Kennel Club for the work that we were doing with students. I have to say, when he received this award back in 2011, dogs really weren't going into schools back then. They were going into nursing homes and hospitals. But we really expanded their visiting ability in schools and partnering them with programs. So I just want to share a little video with you. So what I want to share with you about that video is that you may notice that there were a lot of different people holding Miki. And I think that's one of the key things to a good therapy dog is just their adaptability. You know, pretty much anyone can hold him and he doesn't show any signs of stress or anxiety. He's very, very adaptable. As I said, I think it's the key to finding a really good therapy dog. And a lot of that comes from he knows I'm not far, and it's that relationship. So he trusts that I'm never going to put him in harm's way. I'm never going to put him in the arms of somebody who I know might hurt him. So after we started working with Miki, we started going to schools, we just started seeing more and more of the responses that people had to the dogs. So we knew we wanted to keep growing our programs. So these are the different programs that we do currently in schools. Well, not all of them in schools, but the mental wellness program, we have programs from kindergarten through 12. We also have some programs that we do on college campuses. We're also just recently, within the last year, implemented the facility and school therapy dogs because more and more people are starting to see the benefits that dogs have on children in school. And so more and more counselors are coming to me, and I'll talk a little bit more about one of the big projects we're working on right now. The other thing that we do, this has been really bittersweet, it's been really hard. When there's a loss of a student in a school, we are called in to bring the dogs. And there have been quite a few, sadly, student deaths. And I hear it over and over again that, you know, the counselors are there, counselors are brought in from outside the district, and the students just don't talk. And then the dogs come in, and there's a whole different atmosphere that the kids will sit on the floor with the dogs and pet, and then the counselors sit on the floor with the dogs and the kids, and that the grieving process actually starts. We also do lunch and learns where we go to businesses. We like to talk to adults, and our goal is to reach parents. You know, part of the struggles we face, we do mental health programs for kids, but how do we educate parents so that they can recognize signs and symptoms? So we offer our programming to different businesses, and then we bring dogs, right? So everybody likes to see us coming in because we have dogs. And then the emotional support dog. So as I said earlier, we've provided a few service dogs. We've done some training. Right now, all we really commit to is we'll help people with their dogs to train them to the level of an emotional support dog. And we don't promise anything, but we help them do behavioral assessments, and then we help them with training. And, you know, once we see that they're at a level, first goal is that Canine Good Citizen, second goal is therapy dog certification, and then final is that ESA certification. So these are some pictures from our K through 12 programs. This is Goober, that's Goober, the little one's Goober. That's Harley there. You can just see all the smiles. So we do a program for our middle and high schoolers. It's called Coming Up for Air. And we talk about mental health. We talk about signs and symptoms. And we talk about statistics, about not getting help. And then we talk about signs of suicide. And it's a tough topic. But what we find is after the program, the kids have time to pet the dogs. And they can come up, they talk to the handlers, they pet the dogs. Very often, young people will share how they're feeling when they're interacting with the dogs. So we ask all our handlers to be youth mental health first aid certified. So if they hear something that might alert them, they can then talk to the counselor, refer the student to the counselor. We've also recognized the fact that suicide rate of those 12 and under has actually doubled in the last 10 years. So we knew we needed to incorporate more programs for younger students. So we have the mental health toolkit, which we talk about different coping mechanisms, and one of those is hugging your pet. And then the last program that we just rolled out, it's called Miki and Friends Go to School. It's exploring emotions through the eyes of a dog. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to schools, talk to little ones about dog emotions. And as a dog trainer, what I've learned is that behavior is not much different between a human versus a canine versus a chicken. I went to chicken camp for a week, and that's where it all dawned on me that behavior is behavior. We want to recognize good behavior, reward it, and then the negative behavior, we're either going to ignore it or correct it quickly and then not dwell on it, and we want to move on. But those are the programs. Every one of our programs, we bring dogs with us. And I will tell you that we have been told that the retention rate for our Coming Up for Air program in the high school and middle school, it can be months, where the administrators have told us that typical programming, that retention rate is maybe 2 weeks, but ours is months, because the students associate the material with the dogs. So this is our school facility dog program. As I said, we have a couple dogs that are been certified to work with counselors, but Hopewell Valley lost a student about 2 years ago, and the superintendent was one of those people who saw the magic that the dogs performed when they came in to help the kids with their grieving process. So he approached me, and his goal was to have at least one certified dog on every school campus every single day. So 6 administrators would come every Monday morning at 7 o'clock on their own time, and we spent time with them and training their dogs. And it took a year, but now we have 6 dogs, and they're all certified. And we're now working on the second cohort of 8 dogs. So when it's Read to the Dog Day, it's Dr. Seuss Day, if it's finals or midterms, or if it's just, you know, a day to meet a dog, they have teams of dogs now that are always available. And here are the crisis support dogs. So, as I said, sadly, you know, we've been doing too much of this, and we go not just for the students, but we also go for the staff. You know, if there's a student that's lost, staff very often, you know, feel that guilt, you know, the what if, I had done something, what did I miss? So we're there for them as well. This is my collie, Misha Silver Lining. You can see how he lays down. I taught him to do a side. He'll lay on his side while the students are petting him. So our lunch and learns for professionals. So again, we come in, we do a presentation, but we bring dogs with us, right? So everybody loves seeing the dogs. It's really amazing. I was in one high school, and you know, I heard students talking, and they're like, "Oh, there's dogs. Why are there dogs in school?" And then the students said very excitedly, "Oh, AIR is here." Like, they were so excited that there was a mental wellness program in the building because of the dogs. And that's what our hope is to build up this, you know, have more dogs in school so that kids are just happy. So that's it for me. I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have. You can reach me at tricia@air.ngo. And again, I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Tricia. Thank you for that informative presentation. We'll take a few questions. So can any breed of dog be a therapy dog?
Well, as I said, it's more dependent upon the individual personality of the dog. I have 3 little dogs. I have 3 Pomeranians. I love Pomeranians. I never thought I'd love little dogs, but once I had my first one, it's like I fell in love with them. But I still love my big dog. And I do determine, based on where I'm going, which dog that I'm bringing with me. So really any breed. you always want to make sure you understand your dog really well. Some dogs are super high energy and they may not be able to do, say, one of our programs, because my dogs will have to sleep in their crate for an hour while I'm doing my presentation. And then when I'm done, then they pop up and then they do their interaction with students. So if you have a dog that has too much energy, then maybe you are going to, say, a hospital where you're always on the move. You don't stay and the dog doesn't have to be quiet. So you want to think about where you're going, and then, you know, can your dog be able to adjust, or, you know, be flexible enough to be able to be either in a hospital or in a school or, you know, a library, read to the dog program. That's another thing where, you know, we had an hour of reading. Well, my rule was the dog had to be on their mat quiet. Nobody was allowed to touch the dog for 50 minutes because it was out of respect. We wanted to make sure that every student was able to read and everybody listened. And then when all the reading was done, then the dog was allowed off of their mat and the students were allowed to interact. So you have to kind of figure out, if you have a dog already, you know, what would your dog like to do, and then figure out where would you like to go. And if you have something in mind, then maybe you can find a, match your dog up with what your goals are.
Okay. And that kind of leads into the next question. How do you find a dog that has the right temperament to be a therapy dog?
That's a really good question. And so if you are looking for a dog specifically with the purpose of being a therapy dog, there are many dogs in rescues that could be really lovely dogs. You may want to consider finding a dog trainer or a behaviorist that can help you identify a dog with the right temperament before you bring the dog home. The other thing you might have to do too is, if you bring home a dog, just understand that the dog might present in a way, once they're home and comfortable, in a way that may not be conducive to doing therapy work. So you have to kind of, I guess, lower expectations in the beginning until you could figure out your dog and whether or not it's something that your dog is going to enjoy doing. You can also research through a breeder. Now, I always tell everybody there's good and bad breeders, there's good and bad rescues. So you want to make sure wherever you get your dog from, you're doing your research. You know, I know all of my breeders. I have relationships with them. You know, before I bring home a dog, like I said, those two little Poms that were donated to us, I had been talking to that breeder for 3 years on Facebook, and we had a lovely relationship. And I knew all of her dogs. Now, I never met them. I knew them all. I followed them all on Facebook, and I followed her stories, and I trusted her. I think that's really key, is that you build up a relationship with somebody where you trust. Again, I know people in certain rescues. I have wonderful relationships with them, and I trust them, so that this way I would send anybody to them to find a dog, because they're going to be honest. You know, what I saw happening since the pandemic, I don't know if anyone knows this, but everybody got a puppy during the pandemic, everybody, or they rescued a dog. And what that led to was a shortage of dogs in need of homes. And so sadly, I know of at least a dozen dogs that were put in homes that shouldn't have been put in homes. Not that it was, well, one or two were aggressive, but a couple of the other ones just needed to be in a home where people knew dogs, as opposed to putting them with somebody who had never had a dog before. Because some dogs, if they don't have a strong leader, they're going to become the leader. So so just do your homework, see if you can come up, you know, develop a relationship with someone, whether it be through a rescue or, you know, a breeder, if you have an idea of a type of dog that you like, and you know, and somebody who you can trust. You know, rescues, like I work a lot with the Trenton, oh my gosh, I can't think of it. It's Easel. I'm sorry, Ewing Animal Shelter. And what's nice about Easel is that every Saturday morning they do a training session. And you can go up there every Saturday morning and you can watch every dog and you can meet every dog and you can go back week to week and you can start to build a relationship with the dog before you decide to bring the dog home. The other thing that some rescues or shelters do is they allow you to foster before you actually adopt the dog. So you foster the dog, you bring the dog into your home, and you start to figure out the personality of the dog. And if you think it might be a good fit, then you adopt the dog and it becomes part of your family, and then you go off on your therapy dog journey. But just understand, it could be the individual dog is what we're looking at. So it could be any breed, any size dog, rescue or breeder.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like a lot of it has to do with kind of the, I believe you said it in the beginning, sort of the relationship between the dog and the, and the owner, finding that kind of right fit.
Right.
So have a couple of more questions. It
Sure.
seems like a lot of what you do is in schools, but you did mention you go to other settings as well. Is there any particular age that is more sort of responsive to emotional support animals or therapy dogs, or is this something that's kind of effective across the board?
Yeah, I find it's universal, whether I'm there with little kids or whether I'm there with the staff. We go to help staff. I also have volunteered at the Penn Medicine Hospital, and we did a lot for the staff because there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of heartbreak in some of the departments, and I would go to the OB department just for staff, not for patients, but just for staff, because this relationship, they make you feel good. It's just something of, well, the research shows all these chemicals get released when you interact with the dog, and they just make you feel better. So you can have a really horrible day and then you interact with the dog for a few minutes and it does make you feel better.
Okay, yeah, I think that that's an important point again that you raised earlier, that there's really there's a physiological response that occurs that that is in part creates the impact that these animals have with people. And then I think one last question: how long does it take to train a dog to be a service dog, or to get them sort of ready to be a therapy dog?
Okay, so now that's two different things.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so just service dog is very different. It will take years to do a service dog. Therapy dog is easier. Remember, service dog has full public access and is task trained to work to mitigate a disability. So it can take, I would say, at least 2 to 3 years to fully train a service dog. And then there has to be time for the handler to be trained, and then they work together. For a therapy dog, and it depends upon the individual dog, like our little Henry Palmchester, he, at 1 year of age, he took his test, he passed, he was good. The other dogs were between 2 and 3. So you want to let the dog mature. Henry just was born an little old man, and that's why he's always been very mature. And it takes, and again, this is very individualized. If people are going to work with their dogs every day, especially when they're young, it's going to happen faster. If they're working with them maybe every couple days and they're not really working with them, it's obviously going to take a lot longer. And every dog is an individual. Some dogs love to train. Some dogs, remember I said earlier, some dogs might have ADHD. I'm convinced dogs have ADHD. Some of them have ADHD, where they have a really hard time focusing on the handler, and it can take time for them to mature and grow out of that. Some dogs, it might take a really long time, and then some dogs may never grow out of that. But I want to say it between a year to 2 years is a good amount of time to expect to train your dog to do therapy work. Just remember, 6 months, they're no longer puppies. 6 to approximately 18 to 24 months, they're teenagers. And then between that 18, 24 months, they become adults. They become more mature, depending upon the breed and the individual dog. You know, so around that age is where I would say, as long as you continue with your training, you will be able to get them within that time. Now, the dogs that I'm working with at Hopewell Valley and the school dogs, it's about a year that we do. But the dogs that are coming to me have had some sort of training previously. So we're not starting, you know, completely from scratch, and we're not starting with little puppies that are, you know, bouncing all over the place. So they're mature dogs with a little bit of training under their belts, but it takes about a year.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I think that's all the questions we have for tonight. Thank you very much again, Tricia. We appreciate your being here tonight, your presentation. We thank everybody else for attending. And I'm going to turn it over to Kelly again, just to wrap up the evening.
Okay, well, we had one submission more where the woman says, I currently have a seeing eye puppy that I have raised and is now a certified therapy dog. He works with students at my school since I am a teacher, and he has his CGC. Are there any other tests that I should look into for him?
Well, I would also just double check insurance. Because a lot of most therapy dog organizations do not cover the therapy dog when they go to work. So make sure you're covered by insurance. Maybe your school is covering you by insurance. So just as I said, I would check that out, because you wouldn't want something to happen and then find that no one's covering you with insurance. You know, if you wanted to do more, we only require the first level, the CGC, and then the therapy test. But there's additional, we like to do trick training with the dogs, because what we find is all kids love to see dogs do tricks. So we do the trick title with the dogs. There's different, there's the community canine good citizen. There's a couple CGC levels that if you wanted to do more training, you could. But you know, we only require those two. Again, I don't know what your school requires. You know, this is very individualized, and you know, a lot of it's depending upon what your school is looking for.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. And thank everyone for joining our webinar, Air Therapy Dogs, Paws for Minds. There is an exit survey which we need everyone attending to fill out. The webinar blog is open now and available for the next 7 days on the NJCTS website for any additional questions that were not covered in tonight's presentation. That website is www.njcts.org. Also, an archived recording of tonight's webinar will be posted to the site. Our next presentation, Non-Medical Treatment of Tics, an overview of cognitive behavioral intervention therapy and the Rutgers Tourette Syndrome Clinic, will be presented by the clinic director, Dr. Graham Hartke, and is scheduled for October 21st, 2020. Thank you. This ends tonight's webinar. Thank you, Tricia, for your presentation.
So thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Good night.
Good night.